Each of our Rebbeim was in a different generation, and we are the der hashvi'i. How is a generation defined, and for how long can we remain the der hashvi'i?
It's a very good question, and I have to preface it by saying that I don't have a proper answer which will sit well, and I don't believe that there's anybody that can have a proper answer on this question, because it's a question that we ask Hashem every second and every moment. Whatever I'll explain now, so you'll say, well, it can go on forever, so what's the point of der hashvi'i? So that question, perhaps someone can answer it. I'm sure there's people who can answer it better, and I'm sure there's people who answer it less. But regardless what you'll answer, there'll always be that will never be fully satisfactory. However, let's try a little bit of a few points. Point number one is that there's one simple thing that the Rebbe told us, and told us a prophecy, a nevuah. Never before in history has there been such a thing that a Rebbe got up and said, I'm telling you a nevuah, a prophecy. And the prophecy is that Mashiach is coming. The Rebbe, in the prophecy, the Rebbe didn't even use the words in our generation. Mashiach is coming. Now it says already in the Torah that Mashiach is coming. But the Rebbe says he's coming now. He's about to come. When does now mean? When it's 20 years later? 25 years later? The Rebbe asks that question regarding the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe said, L'alter legula, the Gula is coming immediately. And the Rebbe said 40 years later, the Rebbe said, well, how do we understand that? And interestingly, the Rebbe didn't give an answer. The Rebbe just said the question itself comes from the darkness of Galus, which means that is what Galus is. Galus is the fact that we don't understand these things. As soon as Mashiach will come, these things will be understood. Galus means godliness is not understood and perceived. But what we do know with certainty, that when the Rebbe told it us, it's the word of Hashem, and Hashem is the one who decides what will happen in the world. And everything the Rebbe tells us is 100% true because it's the word of Hashem. And therefore the Rebbe told us by the word of Hashem that Mashiach is about to come. So any moment that I don't see him coming, I have powerful questions, and yet I know that I can sit and wait, and once he comes, everything will become understood. But in the meantime, the Rebbe didn't just tell it to me for no reason. The Rebbe told it to me because he wants me to stand in a constant state of readiness. Now, with regards to the generation, the meaning of a generation, there could be various meanings of generations. Some talk about generations being an amount of years, etc. If we'll look back to the very beginning of creation, we find an interesting thing. Generations varied. Generations varied by how long the leader of the generation was around, which means the generation of Adam lasted for 930 years. The generation of Shes was shorter because it started only after Adam Harishon, and it continued on until the passing of Shes, etc., etc. A generation, the idea of a generation is as long as this leader, the same leader, is still the leader and the one leading the generation. And similar to what the Gemara tells us about Shimshon, that Shimshon, it says in one place that he was the judge of the Jewish people, which in our words would mean his generation lasted for 20 years. In another place it says he judged the people for 40 years. And the Gemara asks the question, which one is it? And therefore the Gemara says that he passed away after 20 years of judging the people. But for 20 years after his passing, the Plishtim, the enemies of the Jews, were still afraid of him, and therefore they didn't start up with the Jews, and it was as if he's still alive. Now, the question is, there was still another leader after that? Because we think about it as if Shimshon passed away, and for 20 years there was no leader. It's not like that at all. Once Shimshon passed away, there was immediately Eli, who was the leader then. Shmuel was born as soon as Shimshon passed away, and in between the time of Shimshon's passing and the time of the Shmuel becoming old enough to become the leader, there was Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol, who was the leader of the Jewish people. Yet, it was still, in a certain sense, in a certain way, considered the generation of Shimshon, because his leadership was still there. A leader is one that enables the Jewish people to learn Torah, enables the Jewish people to connect to Hashem, and since they weren't afraid of the Plishtim in that time, because the Plishtim were afraid to start up with the Jewish people, therefore at that time it was still considered to be the generation of Shimshon. And in a similar sense, in our time, we know that there's one leader in the generation, and however a person looks at it, if a person wants to look at it one way or another way, which is another discussion, but however a person may look at it, anyone you'll ask, whether a Chabad person or even not a Chabad person, everyone knows that the Rebbe is the Rebbe of the generation. Some will say, I don't want to accept him as my leader, as my Rebbe, whatever it is, but the Rebbe of our generation, there's no other Rebbe, it's the Rebbe. And when the Rebbe tells us in our generation, Mashiach's coming, we are still in the Rebbe's generation. And at the same time, we know that the Rebbe is telling us this, Hine Mashiach ba, and therefore any moment he didn't come is a strong question, and yet we continue with 100% faith to follow what the Rebbe wants us to do, which is to be in a constant state of readiness and awaiting for the immediate coming of Mashiach.